Hello guys, welcome to this video on the GCE4 YouTube channel. I'm Ulrich, yours for today, and in this video we are going to be doing the correction of the Cameroon GCE Advanced Level 2023 Computer Science Paper 3, precisely the programming section. So on that note, let's begin. So we will start by creating our students folder, and we are going to name that GCE for all. From there we move on to our text editor, which is going to be dev C++. In the C++, we create a new source file, and now we can begin the coding process. Here we have our question paper, and if you don't have the paper, you can download it from the GCE for all website, which is linked in the description. Now if you move down to the programming section, we have our question, which reads: many interesting programming problems involving netted loops can be encountered when creating a plot using a printer. The task is to create a plot in figure 1 in bracket pyramid in a general manner with the size of the base entered at the beginning of the program execution. Arrays are not needed to do this. The grid lines are just to ease working with the figure. The lines are not directly needed to answer any question. A pyramid has a maximum number of stars at its base in brackets marked none of stars, and it's made up of rows of spaces and stars. Each line of the pyramid is made up of an odd number n of leading spaces in bracket none of spaces, followed by a number of stars in bracket none of stars. There are blank spaces after the stars, but they are not important for this exercise. So moving down to the first question, they say state the initial value of max number of stars. The max number of stars is the number of stars at its base, and if you count them, they are going to give you 11. The next question says state the number of leading spaces in bracket number of spaces and number of stars for the first line. If you count the number of leading spaces for the first line, they give you 5, and the number of stars in the first line is 1. State the number of leading spaces and stars for the second line. If you count the number of leading spaces for the second line, they're going to give you 4, and the number of stars are going to give you 3. Now the fourth question says between successive lines, the number of stars reduces while the number of leading spaces increase. Hence, by what amount should you multiply number of spaces and number of stars before printing the pyramid if you print successive rows from the top of the pyramid? So as earlier said, the number of spaces start from 5, go down to 4, then 3, so they reduce by 1. And the number of stars, you have 1, then go to 3, then 5, so you see increase by 2. So the number of spaces reduced by 1, the number of stars increased by 2. Moving down to task 2, program development, it says choose either the Pascal or C programming language to implement your plot of the pyramidal stars. Using a suitable editor of your choice, write the following functions and or procedures. The procedure initialize, which takes in the arguments max number of stars, number of spaces, and number of stars to initialize the variables max number of stars, number of spaces, and number of stars for the first line. We go to our text editor. So in dev C++, we start by including our standard input-output header, hashtag include stdio.h. Then we go down to declaration of the function. Now looking at the instruction, the function simply initializes these 3 variables, so the return value is void. Now the function name is initialize, and its arguments are int max number of stars, number of spaces, and number of stars. Alright guys, before proceeding to define the initialize function, there's something very important I need to explain to you guys, which is the scope of variables in C. Now in C, when you define a variable, what happens is the variable is stored in a specific location in the memory. And for say any function in the program to modify the value of this variable, the function needs to have the memory address of this variable, that is where the variable is located in the memory. Now when you define a variable as a global variable, that is the variable is declared out of any function, then any program in the code can access this variable. Now in the case of the initialize function, the variables max number of stars, number of spaces, and number of stars are going to be declared as local variables to the initialize function. And if you read the code further, you see there's a point in time where you have to declare a function called adjust, which is going to modify the values of these 2 variables, number of stars and number of spaces. But these variables are declared locally in the initialize function. So in order for the adjust function to modify these variables, we need to find a way for the initialize function to pass these variables not with the variable names but with the variable's memory address. We call that passing a value by reference. Now passing these variables by reference to the adjust function simply means that the adjust function is going to receive the memory address of these variables and no longer the variables names. And in order to do that, we simply need to declare the variable as a pointer. A pointer is simply a variable which stores the memory address of another variable, and by doing this, we're going to permit the adjust function to know the memory addresses of these variables, hence modify the values of the variables. In order to declare a pointer in C, we simply need to add a star in front of the variable name. So we put a star in front of max node of stars, a star in front of node of spaces, and node of stars. By doing this, whenever the initialize function passes variables to another function, that other function is going to receive their memory addresses and no longer their function name. Hence, this will permit the other function to modify the values of this variable even though the variables are not local to that function or are not global variables. So with that out of the way, we proceed to define the initialize function. The function simply declares the variable max node of stars, node of spaces, and node of stars. So we proceed by declaring these variables in the function. Now, from the values we got from the equations above, we had max node of stars as 11 as we counted. We have node of spaces as 5. We're doing these values for the first line, and we have node of stars as 1. So now with that done, that is all for the initialize function. We can move now to the next question. Now the next question says the procedure output leading spaces with the argument n spaces, which takes the number n spaces and outputs the number of leading spaces for a line on the screen. We define the output leading spaces function. It doesn't return any value, so void, and the function in output leading spaces, and it takes in the argument int n spaces. Now moving on to the program definition, the function prints out the program prints out a number of spaces starting from 0 to the number n spaces. So you simply create a for loop for an integer I starting from 0, I being less than equal to n spaces. Then we increment the I. So we'll just do printf, and it's just going to be an empty space. With that done, the output leading spaces function is completed. We move to the next question. The next question says the procedure output line of stars with parameter n of stars, which takes in the number n stars and output that number of stars for a line on the screen. The function doesn't have any return value, so it's void. The function name output line of stars. The argument is int stars. And then the function is pretty much similar to the output leading spaces function. So we simply copy the loop and we replace the n spaces with n stars, and the function prints stars and not spaces, so stars, printf star. And finally, we know there's no 0 star, the star starts from 1, so the for loop is going to start from I equals to 1. So that's pretty much it for the output line of stars function. Now we move to the next question. Now the next question says the procedure adjusts with parameters node of spaces and node of stars, which adjusts the variable of node of spaces and node of stars to the value used to print the next row of blanks and stars. The adjust function doesn't return any value, so void adjusts the parameters are int node of spaces, which is a pointer as earlier explained, since the variables are going to be modified. And then the other parameter is int node of stars, which is also a pointer. With that done, we go down to the function definition, and if you move back to the equation you answered earlier, which that is question 4, we wrote the number of spaces are going to reduce by 1, so that's going to mean int node of space is going to decrement by 1, and then node of stars is going to increment by 2. So star node of spaces is going to be minus equal to 1, that's going to decrement by 1. Then star node of stars is going to be plus equal to, it's going to increment by 2, that's every time for the next line. So with that done, we save our program. We call it task 2. Now we move to the next question. Now the next question says, develop the algorithm given as a solo code in task 1.1 as a main program that calls the procedures or functions implemented in task 2.2. For it, the no of spaces, no of stars, and marks no of stars presented under task description are stored in global variables. Alright, so let's do that. So in our editor, we write the main function, that is int main void. Then in the main function, we have to declare the variables marks no of stars, no of space, and no of stars. We simply make life easy, copy that, remove the stars, and remove the function, the variable type, that is the integer before the variables. And that pretty much is it for defining the variables. Now looking at the algorithm which was given to us, and the algorithm says initialize, copy this and paste it in the main function. Now we remove the parameter type, and then since we are referencing the pointers, now we no longer use the star but use the and sign. Now the next step of the algorithm says for current line, repeat leading spaces, output line of stars, adjust the variable leading space and leading stars. So to repeat, you simply call a loop, a for loop, which starts with an integer I being equal to 0, and then the I has to be less than equal to the height of the pyramid. In order to calculate the height of the pyramid, we simply need to divide the maximum of stars by 2, since the base of the star is 2 times the height. So height is equal to maximum of stars divided by 2. That should be the height of the pyramid. So in the for loop, int I equals to 0, I less than equal to height, then I plus plus. Now in the for loop, the algorithm says output leading spaces and output line of stars. So we put the output leading spaces. Now we no longer need the parameter type, so we remove the int. It no longer uses the argument n spaces, rather it uses the argument no of spaces, since what we initialize in the main function. And output leading stars, it no longer uses the argument n stars, rather it uses the argument no of stars. So with that done, we move down now to printing a new line, that's printf/n, to go to the next line. Then after printing /n, we are now on a new line. We now adjust the values of no of spaces and no of stars by calling the adjust function. So we just simply do this, and now we remove the stars and the argument type, of course. Typically that should be it for the program. We check what the question says to do. Run the program. So we run the program, hoping there are no errors. And oh, we got an error. Oh, okay. Now we run the program again, and you see you have your pyramid of stars just as expected. With that out of the way, we can now do a screenshot and go to Microsoft Word to paste a screenshot for printing. So we save, ensure it's in your students folder, of course. So that's it for the exercise. Now we move down to the next part of the question. So the next task, question 5, modify your program so that it asks the user to enter an odd positive integer and then it displays a diamond of stars based on the number. For example, the value 7 would produce, this is the diamond of stars. And basically, to understand how it works, it first of all starts by printing like the initial pyramid you created. It prints the first pyramid of stars where the number of spaces reduced by 1 and the number of stars increased by 2. Then after printing the first pyramid of stars, it then proceeds to printing the bottom where the number of spaces increased by 1 and the number of stars reduced by 2. So it prints a first pyramid which faces the top and the second pyramid facing the bottom. And the next pyramid is going to start from the max number of stars minus 2. Since the both pyramids share similar bases, we cannot create a new base again. So in order to do that, we come back to our function, and under the initialize function, we ask the user to enter the positive odd number. So printf, enter a positive odd number. Then from there, we get the positive odd number, which is using the scanf function. Scanf %d and the star maximum of stars because it's a pointer. So after that, for the initialize function, we proceed down to the adjust function. Knowing well that the adjust function is going to adjust for two pyramids, that is a pyramid which goes down and a pyramid which goes up. So we can decide to say adjust up for the first pyramid and adjust down for the next pyramid. So adjust up, and for the adjust down, we simply know that the number of spaces are rather going to increase by 1, no longer reduce, and the number of stars are going to reduce by 2. With that done, you have to go back to the initialize function and understand that max number of stars is no longer 11, is what the user is going to enter, and number of spaces, since it depends on the number of stars, number of spaces is simply going to be the number of stars the user is going to enter divided by 2 minus 1. That's for the number of spaces. So with that done, we now go to the main function. With that done, we now go to the main function, and of course we adjust this adjust up. And after the first pyramid has been printed, we need to reset the values of no of stars and no of spaces in order to print the next line. So no of stars for the next pyramid is simply going to start like 2 stars less than the base of stars. That's 2 stars less than the maximum of stars, since the both pyramids share a similar base. So no of stars simply equal to max no of stars minus 2. And the no of spaces goes to 0. That's for the next pyramid, the first number of spaces goes to 0. And then we now put the for loop to print the next pyramid, that's the pyramid facing downwards. So we simply paste the for loop, and you adjust the adjust function, that is no longer adjust up, it's rather adjust down. So with that out of the way, the function, we should continue to see if everything works well. That 13, and it works pretty well. If you enter the game, you enter say 27, it works well, and 57, and it works pretty well. So that's it for the programming. So the final instruction says run a program with a pyramid of the 7 and test it, ensure that it works correctly. Screenshot the output of your program and save it in a file named task3. Also print the screenshot. So we do a screenshot like this, do a screenshot and save it in the MS Word. And the final question says print a copy of your program source code and attach it to your answer booklet. So your invigilator is going to do that since you need to be directly connected to a printer. So we basically just leave it like that. And we are done with the exercise. So that was basically it. For those in the WhatsApp and Telegram group, this folder is going to be forwarded to you. And well, I guess this marks the end of this video. Speaking of, and if you're able to follow this video up to this point, then leaving a like and a sub will be highly appreciated. With that out of the way, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all again in the next one.